The castle had been dead for 2 years, until the vampire king returned unexpectedly and heard his daughters laughing. The maid was in the center of it all, holding the miracle he thought he'd lost forever. But what did she do that terrified the king more than any enemy he'd ever faced? Before we begin, share where you're watching from in the comments, and when the story concludes, give it a rating from 0 to 10. Ready? Let's get started. The gates of Valor Castle creaked open without ceremony. No horns announced his arrival. No guard snapped to attention in the courtyard. King Aldrich Valor had returned home as silently as the shadows that clung to his black cloak, his pale face drawn tight beneath the moonless sky. He preferred it this way. The less attention, the fewer questions about why he had cut his diplomatic mission short. The fewer eyes watching him walk these halls that reeked of memory and loss. The stone corridors stretched before him, cold and familiar. 2 years had passed since Queen Seraphina's death, yet the castle still felt like a tomb. His daughters, his twin daughters, had not spoken since the day they laid their mother's body to rest in the frozen earth. Lyra and Aloan had become ghosts in their own home, drifting through chambers as silent as the grave that had claimed the only warmth this kingdom had ever known. Aldrich's immortal heart had learned to endure the silence. It was easier than facing what he had failed to protect. But then he heard it. A sound so soft, so impossible, that he stopped mid-stride, his pale hand gripping the stone wall for balance. Laughter. Children's laughter. His breath caught, an absurd reaction for one who no longer needed air to survive. Yet there it was, rising through the corridor like a melody he had forgotten existed. Light. Joyful. Alive. Aldrich's legs moved before his mind could catch up. He followed the sound through the twisting hallways, past the portraits of ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to watch him with accusation. The laughter grew louder, mingling now with another sound, a woman's voice, gentle and warm, singing a tune he did not recognize. The library door stood ajar, golden firelight spilling across the threshold. Aldrich approached as if walking through a dream. Toys he had never seen before littered the stone floor, wooden dolls, painted horses, a stuffed bear with one missing eye. Parchment drawings covered the rug in a riot of color, stars and dragons, flowers and castles, rendered in the unsteady hands of children who had finally found something worth creating. He stepped through the doorway, and the world stopped. Rowena Hale, the low-born maid hired months ago when he'd been away quelling border disputes, stood in the center of the library with Lyra clinging to her back, small arms wrapped around her neck. The child's face was split wide with a grin, her dark curls bouncing as Rowena spun in a slow circle. Aloan danced at the maid's feet, clutching handfuls of her simple gray skirt, her laughter ringing like bells through the sacred silence of this haunted place. Again. Again. Lyra shrieked, her voice bright and clear. Aldrich's knees nearly buckled. She spoke. Rowena's golden hair caught the firelight as she laughed, a sound as natural as breathing, and spun faster. One more time, my darlings, then it's time for... She turned. Her forest green eyes met his. The laughter died. Rowena froze mid-spin, her face draining of color. The twins' heads turned in unison, and their smiles vanished like candles snuffed by a sudden wind. Aldrich stood in the doorway, the vampire king of Irondale, lord of darkness and death, his pale face streaked with something he had not felt in 200 years. Tears. What? He whispered, his voice breaking on the single word. Did you do? The question hung in the air like frost, but Aldrich already knew he would receive no answer tonight. Not with his daughters staring at him as though he were a stranger, their joy extinguished as swiftly as it had appeared. He had not always been the specter of dread in his own home. 2 years ago, Valor Castle had been different. Queen Seraphina had filled these halls with light, her laughter, her warmth, her humanity somehow softening even the ancient darkness that ran through Aldrich's veins. She had been the bridge between his immortal world and the beating hearts of their daughters. Then came the diplomatic summit at the border of Thornwick, a gathering meant to secure peace. Instead, rival kingdoms had orchestrated an ambush, and Seraphina, too trusting, too kind, too human, had fallen before Aldrich could reach her. He had arrived to find her blood staining the snow, her eyes already glassy with death. His vampire speed, his centuries of power, his command over shadows and night, all of it useless. He had failed to protect the one soul who had made eternity bearable. Lyra and Eloan had been 6 years old enough to understand that their mother was gone, old enough to retreat so deeply into their grief that they never returned. The silence had been immediate. One day they were bright, chattering girls who filled the nursery with questions and games. The next, they were hollow shells who flinched at every sound and spoke not a single word. Aldrich had summoned everyone. Court healers who examined them with ancient instruments. Vampire seers who peered into their minds and found only darkness. Blood rituals performed under the full moon. Incantations whispered in languages older than kingdoms. Nothing worked. The twins remained trapped behind invisible walls of trauma, and the whispers began. The royal heirs are cursed. The queen's death broke them beyond repair. They will never speak again. Aldrich could not bear it. Every time he looked at Lyra's dark curls, so like Seraphina's, or heard Eloan's footsteps echo through empty corridors, the guilt threatened to consume him. He had failed as a husband. He could not bear to fail as a father too, so he did what he knew best. He left. Border disputes, trade negotiations, military campaigns against kingdoms who dared test Irondale's strength. Anything to keep him away from the castle, from the silence, from the living reminders of his greatest failure. The palace grew colder. Servants whispered in shadowed alcoves. The twins wandered the halls like ghosts, hand in hand, their faces blank and expressionless. Maids came and went. Most quit within weeks, unnerved by the children's silence or the oppressive grief that saturated every stone. Until Rowena Hale arrived from a village whose name Aldrich couldn't remember and likely never asked. She was nobody, a peasant girl with no family name, no magical ability, no connections to recommend her. The head housekeeper had hired her out of desperation when the previous maid fled in tears. But Rowena possessed something none of the others had: patience. She did not try to force the twins to speak. She did not hover over them with pity or treat them as fragile, broken things. Instead, she sat with them in silence, folding linens while they played listlessly with forgotten toys. She hummed old folk songs under her breath. She left small treats on their pillows, honey cakes, ribbons, smooth river stones. She simply existed in their world without demanding anything in return. 3 weeks after her arrival, Lyra smiled. Just barely, a tiny quirk of her lips when Rowena made a silly face while braiding her hair. It was the first crack in the wall. Rowena became their shadow, their constant, the only warmth in a castle that had forgotten what warmth meant. And Aldrich had never known. The transformation had been gradual, so slow that even Rowena had not dared to hope at first. During the first week, Lyra and Eloan simply watched her. They perched on the window seat of the nursery like small, wary birds, their dark eyes following Rowena's every movement as she tidied their chambers and changed their bedding. She spoke to them softly, narrating her tasks as if they might respond, though she expected nothing. "The sun is lovely today, isn't it? Perhaps we could take a walk in the gardens later, if you'd like." Silence. Always silence. But they watched. By the 3rd week, something shifted. When Rowena settled into the cushioned chair by the fireplace to darn stockings, the twins crept closer. First Eloan, dragging her favorite blanket, curled up on the rug near Rowena's feet. Then Lyra followed, clutching a wooden doll with faded paint. They sat within arm's reach, still silent, but present in a way they had not been before. Rowena began to read to them. Old folk tales from her village, stories of clever foxes and brave maidens, of magic that lived in ordinary kindness. She did not ask them questions or demand reactions. She simply gave them her voice, steady and warm. The 5th week brought the miracle. More. Eloan whispered one evening, so quietly that Rowena nearly missed it. The maid's hands froze mid-turn of the page. She looked down to find Eloan's wide eyes staring up at her, hopeful and terrified at once, as if speaking might shatter the fragile peace between them. Rowena's throat tightened. "Of course, darling," she managed, her voice thick. "As many stories as you like." After that, the words came in trickles. Small, fragile things that Rowena gathered like precious gems and kept close to her heart. "Thank you. I'm hungry. Will you stay?" By the 8th week, she heard them singing. It happened one afternoon while she brushed Lyra's hair, humming an old lullaby her own mother had sung. Eloan joined in first, her voice barely a whisper, then Lyra, hesitant but growing stronger. The melody filled the nursery, imperfect, halting but alive. Rowena wept silently, her tears falling into Lyra's dark curls. She told no one. The court was full of gossip and judgment, and she could not bear the thought of noble physicians descending upon the girls, poking and prodding, demanding they perform their newfound voices like trained animals. She would not give anyone false hope, least of all a king who had abandoned his daughters to wage wars in distant lands. Let this be theirs alone for now. Let it be safe. Meanwhile, 300 miles north, Aldrich Vaylor stood in a war tent surrounded by maps and weary generals. "Your Majesty, the border skirmishes continue," General Kane reported, his armor still splattered with mud. "But the greater concern is political. The nobles grow restless. 2 years without a queen. Enough." Aldrich's voice was ice. "Sire, an alliance through marriage could secure." "I said enough." The generals exchanged glances, but said nothing more. They had learned not to push. Captain Thorne, Aldrich's steward, stood silent in the corner. He had received word from the castle, whispers from servants about the twins, about laughter heard in corridors, about the maid who seemed to work miracles where magic had failed. But he kept the reports to himself. What use was hope to a king who did not wish to hear it? Back at Vaylor Castle, the court whispered in shadowed halls. Why does a common maid attend the princesses so closely? Should the king not hire a noble governess? What if she has enchanted them? Rowena felt their stares, heard their doubts. She lay awake at night in her small servant's chamber, listening to the castle settle around her, and wondered what would happen when the king finally returned. She had grown to love Lyra and Eloan as if they were her own. She braided their hair and wiped their tears and held them when nightmares came. She was not their mother, could never be, but she had become something close. And she feared that love would be her undoing. The silence in the library stretched like a blade between them. Aldrich's question still hung in the air. "What did you do?" But the shock on his face was already twisting into something darker. Rowena saw it happen, watched the awe in his pale features harden into suspicion, then flare into something that made her blood run cold. Jealousy. 2 years, he said, his voice low and dangerous. 2 years of silence. The greatest healers in Irondale could not reach them. Blood magic. Ancient rituals. Nothing worked. He took a step forward, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Yet somehow, a peasant maid with no training, no power, no right. "Father?" Lyra's voice was small, uncertain. Aldrich's eyes snapped to his daughter's, and for a moment, something like pain crossed his face. But it vanished beneath the rising tide of his fury. "What sorcery is this?" He turned on Rowena, fangs flashing as his lips pulled back. "What manipulation have you used on my daughters? What spell? What enchantment?" "Your Majesty, Rowena's voice trembled, but she held her ground. "Do not lie to me." The words erupted like thunder, shaking the very stones of the castle. Lyra and Eloan flinched, their small bodies recoiling as if struck. You come into my home. Worm your way into their hearts while I am away defending this kingdom. I did nothing but care for them. Rowena's fear gave way to something fiercer. Something you have not done in 2 years. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Aldrich's face drained of what little color it held. His hands trembled at his sides, and when he spoke again, his voice was deadly quiet. You overstep, Maid. You forget your place. These are my daughters.
Mine.
You are nothing but a servant who has stolen their affection through tricks I do not yet understand.
No.
Eloan's cry pierced the air. She clutched at Rowena's skirt, tears streaming down her face. No, father, please. But Aldrich could not stop. The wound was too deep, the jealousy too sharp. How dare this nobody succeed where he, their father, their king, an immortal with centuries of wisdom, had failed? How dare she make them love her when he could not even make them speak? You are dismissed from this castle, he said, each word falling like a gravestone. You will leave tonight. If you return, you will be arrested for witchcraft and manipulation of the royal heirs. Father, no. Lyra sobbed, running to him, small fists beating against his legs. Please. We need her. Please don't make her go. But Aldrich could not hear them over the roar of his own shame. Rowena stepped backward, her face pale, her forest green eyes bright with unshed tears. She looked at the twins, her girls, her precious girls, and something inside her shattered. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. She turned and fled the library, her footsteps echoing through the halls. The moment she disappeared, the twin sobs turned to screams. They collapsed onto the floor, wailing, reaching toward the empty doorway as if their hearts were being torn from their chests. And in the terrible silence that followed, as Aldrich stood alone in the library surrounded by scattered toys and dying firelight, he realized what he had done. He had killed their joy with his own hands. The castle fell silent once more. By morning, it was as if the past 8 weeks had never existed. Lyra and Eloan retreated to their chamber and refused to emerge. They would not speak. They would not eat. When servants brought trays of food, the girls turned their faces to the wall, their small bodies curled together on the bed like wounded animals seeking shelter. Aldrich tried. He stood outside their door for an hour the first day, his hand pressed against the wood, searching for the courage to enter. When he finally did, the twins looked at him with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition, only fear and something far worse. Betrayal. Lyra, he began, his voice catching. Eloan, But they turned away from him, silent and still as corpses. He tried again the next day, and the next. Each time, they flinched from his touch, shrank from his presence. The king who commanded armies and bent nations to his will could not reach his own daughters. On the 3rd morning, Captain Thorne found him in the throne room, staring at nothing. Your Majesty. The steward's voice was careful, measured. There is something you should know. Aldrich did not look up. Speak. The princesses, they regained their voices months ago, sire. Thorne shifted his weight, uncomfortable. The servants reported it. Small words at first, then conversations.
Songs.
Laughter. I did not think to inform you. I assumed. You assumed I did not care. Aldrich's voice was hollow. Sire. Leave me. Thorne bowed and retreated, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. Alone, Aldrich bent forward, his head in his hands. Months. His daughters had been speaking for months, and he had not known, had not been there, had been too consumed by his own grief, his own cowardice, to see the miracle happening in his own castle. And when he finally witnessed it, he had destroyed it with his bare hands. That night, sleep eluded him. He wandered the corridors like a ghost, finding himself once again outside the twins' chamber. He pressed his ear to the door, listening for any sound, any sign of life. And then he heard it. Voices. Soft and broken, but unmistakable. "Do you think she's warm?" Eloan whispered. "Where she is now. I hope so." Lyra's voice cracked. "Rowena would never have left us. Not unless. Father made her go. He made her sad. I saw her face. I miss her so much it hurts." "Me too." The simple words pierced Aldrich deeper than any blade ever had. He sagged against the wall, his immortal body suddenly feeling every one of his centuries. His daughters were speaking, not to him, but about their pain, about the person who had saved them while he had been too broken to try. His vision blurred. Tears, hot and unfamiliar, tracked down his pale cheeks. For 200 years, Aldrich Vaylor had been invincible. He had conquered kingdoms, survived countless battles, outlasted plagues and wars and the rise and fall of empires. Nothing had broken him, but hearing his daughters whisper in the dark about the woman who loved them while their own father had driven her away, that shattered him completely. He slid down the wall until he sat on the cold stone floor, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For the first time in his immortal life, the vampire king felt utterly, devastatingly powerless. And he had no one to blame but himself. Rowena's village was a half-day's ride south, a cluster of modest cottages nestled against the edge of Thornwood Forest. Aldrich arrived at dusk, his dark cloak billowing behind him as he dismounted. He knocked on the door of a weathered cottage. An elderly woman answered, her eyes widening in recognition and fear. "I seek Rowena Hale," Aldrich said, his voice stripped of its usual command. "She doesn't wish to see you, Your Majesty." The woman began to close the door. "Please." The word felt foreign on his tongue. "Please, I must speak with her." She said no. The door shut in his face. Aldrich returned the next evening. This time an older man answered, Rowena's uncle, perhaps. His weathered face was hard as stone. "My niece has suffered enough at your hands, sire. Leave her be." "I only need a moment." "You've had centuries of moments. You wasted them." The man's voice was firm. "Go back to your castle." The door closed again. On the third night, Aldrich did not bother knocking. He stood in the small garden outside Rowena's window and called her name until she finally appeared, silhouetted against the lamplight within. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, I am begging you." The door opened slowly. Rowena stepped out, wrapped in a simple shawl, her face drawn and tired. She looked older than she had just days ago, as if grief had aged her. "You're begging?" Her voice was hollow. "Kings don't beg. This one does." And before she could protest, Aldrich Vaylor, Lord of Irondale, commander of armies, a creature who had bowed to no one in 2 centuries, dropped to his knees in the dirt before her. Rowena stared down at him, stunned. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was cruel and jealous and blind. You gave my daughters something I could not. You gave them hope. And I punished you for it because I could not bear my own shame. You called me a witch." Her voice trembled with suppressed anger. "You accused me of manipulating them. You threatened me with arrest. I know. You punished love, Your Majesty. You punished healing. You saw your daughters happy and you destroyed it because it hurt your pride." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I cannot return to a place where joy is treated as a threat. Then I will change that place." Aldrich looked up at her, his pale face streaked with dirt and desperation. "Tell me what you need. Tell me your conditions. I will do anything." Rowena was silent for a long moment, studying him. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "You must be present for your daughters. No more running away to wage wars while they grow up without you. No more hiding from your grief by abandoning theirs. Done. You must stop ruling through pain. Stop letting Seraphina's death define every choice you make. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. And you must learn to be their father, not their king. They don't need commands or royal expectations. They need your time, your patience, your love. Aldrich bowed his head. I will try. I swear it. Rowena wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Then I will consider returning. Consider? Desperation crept back into his voice. You broke their trust, your majesty. And mine. She turned toward the door. Prove you mean what you say. Then we will speak again. The door closed softly, leaving the vampire king kneeling alone in the dirt beneath the stars. Aldrich did not sleep that night, or the next. Instead, he worked. By dawn, messengers rode out from Valor Castle carrying sealed orders. Border campaigns were suspended. Trade negotiations were delegated to advisors. Alliance meetings requiring the king's presence were postponed indefinitely. The court erupted in confusion, but Aldrich ignored their protests. His place was home. The first morning, he entered the castle kitchens, a place he had not visited in decades, and attempted to prepare breakfast for his daughters. The cook watched in horrified fascination as the vampire king burned porridge over salted eggs and somehow set a dishcloth ablaze. But Aldrich carried the tray upstairs himself. Lyra and Elowen stared at the ruined meal in silence. They did not eat it, but they did not turn away either. It was something. He read to them that afternoon, settling into the chair by the fireplace where Rowena had once sat. His voice was stiff and unpracticed, stumbling over words meant for children, but he continued until the sun set. The twins listened but did not speak. Each day, Aldrich tried again. He brought gentle tutors who taught through play rather than commands. He hired a kind healer who simply sat with the girls, asking nothing. He cleared his schedule of everything except his daughters. He watched them sleep at night, standing silent in their doorway, memorizing the curve of their cheeks and the rise and fall of their breathing, details he had missed while drowning in his own grief. Slowly, imperceptibly, they began to soften. Elowen accepted his hand during a walk through the gardens. Lyra whispered, "Thank you," when he brought her a new book. Small gestures, fragile as spun glass, but they were there. Yet every night, he heard them whisper the same name, Rowena. One evening, he found Elowen clutching one of Rowena's old aprons, tears streaming down her face. Lyra sat beside her sister, stroking her hair, both of them lost in a grief Aldrich could not fix alone. The truth settled over him like a shroud. He was trying. He was changing. But he could not be what they needed most. They needed her. And perhaps, though it terrified him to admit, so did he. The next morning, Aldrich rode south once more. This time, he carried no royal commands, no desperate pleas. Only the truth of a broken man who had finally learned what mattered most. He dismounted outside Rowena's cottage and knocked softly on the door. When she answered, he simply said, "Please come home. Not to serve a king, but to save a family." Rowena stood in the doorway, searching his face. Whatever she found there must have been enough, because after a long moment, she nodded. "I will come." The journey back to Valor Castle felt endless. When they finally passed through the gates, Aldrich led Rowena toward the great hall, where he had asked Captain Thorne to gather the twins. The doors opened. Lyra saw her first. "Rowena!" The shriek echoed off the ancient stones. Both girls exploded into motion, their small feet flying across the polished floor. They crashed into Rowena with such force, she staggered backward, their arms wrapping around her waist, her legs, anywhere they could reach. Tears and laughter mingled together as they clung to her, babbling words over each other. "You came back. We missed you so much. Please don't leave again, please, please." "Never," Rowena whispered, sinking to her knees to hold them properly. "I promise, my darlings. Never again." Aldrich stood apart, watching. His chest ached with something he couldn't name, grief for all the time lost, gratitude that this moment existed at all, and a deep, humbling understanding of how close he had come to destroying everything that mattered. After a long while, Rowena stood, the twins still clinging to her skirts. She turned to face him. "You've changed," she said quietly. "I'm trying. I can see that." She studied him with those forest green eyes. "I will stay, Your Majesty, but not as a maid." "Then as what?" "As what your daughters need."
A guardian. A guide.
Family. Aldrich felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen for 2 long years. He inclined his head, a gesture of respect he had given to no one in centuries. "Thank you," he said simply. Rowena smiled, small but genuine. "We do this together now." "Together," Aldrich agreed. And for the first time since Seraphina's death, light returned to Valor Castle. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons. Lyra and Eloan blossomed. They filled the castle with laughter that echoed through corridors once haunted by silence. They asked endless questions, played elaborate games, and argued over books with the passion of scholars twice their age. They were alive in ways Aldrich had thought forever lost. Rowena guided them with patient hands and gentle wisdom, but she was more than a caretaker now. She dined with the royal family, advised Aldrich on matters concerning the children, and earned the quiet respect of the court through her unwavering devotion. Aldrich himself had changed. His rule, once fueled by grief-stricken severity, softened. He listened more, delegated with trust rather than command. The kingdom noticed. His people whispered of a king reborn. And between Aldrich and Rowena grew something neither had expected. Not romance, but a profound partnership built on shared purpose and hard-won trust. They worked together to heal what had been broken, 2 wounded souls learning to stand in the light. One spring afternoon, Aldrich stood at the library window, watching the twins kneel in the garden below. They planted flowers alongside Rowena, their hands dark with soil, their voices bright with excitement. A yellow butterfly drifted past, landing delicately on a nearby rose. Seraphina's favorite. Aldrich's throat tightened. "Thank you," he whispered to the memory, to the ghost, to whatever remained of the love he had lost. Rowena glanced up as if sensing his gaze. She smiled, warm, knowing, kind. "They chose the light," she called up to him. "And so did you." Aldrich nodded, unable to speak past the emotion rising in his chest. Love could not return the dead. He had learned that bitter truth in blood and tears. But love, real, patient, selfless love, could resurrect the living. And in the laughter of his daughters, in the warmth of his home, in the second chance he had almost destroyed, Aldrich Valor finally understood what it meant to be alive. Did you enjoy this story? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one.